We're live on the internet.
Good evening, everybody.
Too much. I'm still working off the New Year's Eve hangover. So what better way to do it than to have a conversation with one of our favorite people ever, and someone that is almost single-handedly changed sort of the game and the way that people. Hopefully, at least I believe she certainly changed my perception of the way that people perceive Boston and its existence as an artistic community. So I'm really excited. This is sort of the best way, kicking off the rust. Say in 2020, get the hell out of here, or we got something better coming.
That's a very kind way of putting it, I think.
Well,
yeah,
save the swearing for later. You know,
a little bit more whiskey and bring Catherine in to join in the fun. Yeah, it was interesting listening to that video. You know, you and I are very firmly entrenched in the folk community in Boston and the roots and the Americana communities, and you know, we can name all the venues and name all the people and all those things. And there are a number of very different music communities in Boston, and I'm very excited and interested to have this conversation with Catherine because I want to find out about all the ones I don't know about.
I'm excited about that. I'm excited about cross-pollination, hearing all the wonderful stuff they're doing and getting inspired and doing some things together, having fun that way. So like I'm jazzed. I'm excited.
Yeah.
We won't tear this out too much, except to say we did promise everyone last week, and we are there. We now have every one of the Tribal Mischief podcasts from now to the end of the season, which is February 7th, which is very fortunate because I thought we had one more, and means we don't have to do one on Valentine's Day. Because it's a great way to keep ourselves out of trouble. So we'll do our best there.
That's true.
So we're really excited. We've got some absolute doozies coming up. Everything from people who manage online video game communities to people starting nonprofits that fix people's houses and make sure that gentrification doesn't inadvertently destroy the culture of a region. I'm excited about that one, Randall. Excited about one with Michael Weeks, the president of the Mass Council of Human Service Providers, that sort of represents all of the nonprofits and social agencies in Boston. It's really fun stuff, and I know you're really excited about one of those.
Yeah, we've got. We're casting a wide net in the second half of season 2. We've got our friend Garth Kravitz, who is a Broadway actor. He's been in a bunch of shows over the years, and we met him in the acapella world, so we might nerd out a little bit on acapella stories. But he's.
I was about to say I don't understand what's Broadway. I just know him as a vocal percussion. He's not. He makes drum noises with his mouth. Really?
No, he's not. Well. No, wrong guy. That's not him. Wrong guy.
He's the bass?
No, you picked the wrong one. He's the short rock star tenor from the House Jacks.
Oh.
Yeah, that guy.
Fair enough.
Anyway, but yeah, we talk about a lot of different communities, and we bring people in that can tell us about those different ones, and so Garth is January 31st, I think.
I believe so. And all that being said, we recommend. We tried something in the last couple of weeks. We have this long history of running the show on a number of different platforms for the first half hour, and then forcing everyone to Twitch, which is kind of our native home. And what we learned is what we did in the last 2 weeks is we're going to keep them going live on everything. And what we learned is the only people that stuck around until the end were the people on Twitch. So we're probably going to go back to the original method. But just give people the heads up there. We'll probably about half hour in switch over everything to Twitch, which is really easy to get to. The reason we do it is because it's a URL that does not change.
Well, Ethan just bounced out of our chat. As he was saying, Twitch is a URL that does not change. That's twitch.tv/Tribal Mischief. For those of you listening in audio podcast land, hey, Ethan, your audio's not back yet. There it is.
Yeah, that was embarrassing. That
was fun.
And that URL is?
I picked it up. Um,
Absolute faith.
all right. We've had enough of what, we think our viewers have had enough of watching the two of us make fools of ourselves. So somebody needs to save us. So, Catherine, no pressure, but welcome. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's just awesome to be here. So let's do it.
Let's do it.
And you and I met. I'm actually terrified to say, I believe 4 or 5 years ago, like a half decade.
Yep. A half decade, yes. I think it was 2016 ish that we met.
Our mutual friend Jessica Manganello sort of connected us. She had done some work with you and literally called me the next day and was like, "I met this person that you need to meet, and you need to meet her right now." And he
has been singing your praises ever since. Let me tell you.
Oh man,
I have, and I continue to, and I don't suspect I'm going to stop anytime soon.
Well, thank you.
Catherine Morris started the originally BAM's organization, now BAM's Fest, and I discovered earlier this week that I have misnamed you for years, which is embarrassing. But it is the Boston.
But on brand, if we're being fair.
For me, absolutely on brand. If I had gotten it right, people would have questioned. Boston Arts and Music Soul Fest.
Yes. Good for you. Thank you.
I'm enough of an English nerd that I wanted an Oxford comma really badly. So it was for years for me. It was the Boston Arts, Music, and Soul Fest. My bad. I'm sorry.
Okay. I mean, people have left the S off. I mean, people just completely gotten our name wrong. So you're okay. You're all right. You get like a A minus.
I'll take an A minus. I'll even take a B plus. I think B plus is probably fairer, only because I've said it wrong so many times.
That's all right.
But you started the organization 8, 9, 10 years ago, roughly.
The story is I have been planning to do Bands Festival for now 10 years, but it originally started May 2015. So we're just at 5 years. Right. We're very young, relatively. And I the best investment of my life, despite how exhausting this work is. I'm from Boston. The nostalgia of the city that I grew up with, I wanted to see, moving forward. And I think there were just certain parts of my career and life that prepared me to do this work. It wasn't something that was like, oh, I'm going to take a leap of faith. I'm like, no, I've been prepared to do this since birth. It's just, then I had to figure out what the platform was. And for me, I love festivals. I think it is amazing to have an experience with strangers you've never met, and you all find commonality in the music, the food, the environment, clothing, whatever it is. And that's the thing that brings you together. That's the thing that builds relationships.
Absolutely. And you built to that point in a really awe-inspiring way from the outside. From someone, I remember the first show I went to, I couldn't tell you exactly where it was. I know it was sort of in the theater district-ish area.
Arts Emerson, Paramount Theater. I remember it like it was yesterday.
I remember getting there and being like, I didn't even know this was a venue. and like walking up and being like, this is a really, really cool venue. And walking into this room, I think you had like a 200-ish person, 150-ish person. And it was full. You had a full crowd. And like the part of it that blew my mind right away is Jake and I are informed by folk music because that's where we toured and what we know a lot of. And the message behind folk music is always about inclusivity and about speaking for that. But the community itself is not always a fair picture of that level of inclusivity. I remember walking into your room and saying, "This is what we talk about. This is what the ideal is." You had 16-year-olds to 80-year-olds. You had jazz singers. You had poets. You had hip hop artists. You had electronic art. It was astounding. I literally just sat there, big ass grin on my face for an hour and a half, and I'm pretty sure at one point my mouth just hung open. I was like, ah. It was so much fun. But that process that you went through to cultivate that kind of inclusivity and that kind of amplification of voices that let's face it, Boston doesn't have a reputation for going out of its way to amplify Black and brown voices. If at any point in time I use terminology that I shouldn't be using, or you
No, it's
correct
fine.
me,
I got you. I'll check you. I'm good with that.
I have no doubt, and it is something I appreciate about our relationship. So, yeah, I really, I just was so impressed at that particular thing. Can you talk about the evolution from those shows to the festival?
Yeah. So, Arts Emerson was one of our first venue partners, which was shocking because we literally just started. It's just like, all right, we got this beautiful venue that houses 200 people. It's a black box theater. I love black box theaters. They're my favorite. I could do a whole bunch of black box theaters. And, anytime I walk into a space, it's always about a feeling. It is. I mean, as crazy as it sounds, it's like how many outlets, angles, what do I want people to walk into? What I want them to walk away with? What color scheme? Where's the scents? Is it going to be more flowery, more frankincense? Like, I look at all those things to then determine what kind of artists can bring that energy to that particular space.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to go into a venue and say you want to play. It's another thing to be transformative.
Yep.
And that's something that I always aspired to do, just because space means so much to me as someone, who's over 6 feet, where I have to accommodate all the time, and with,
I feel you.
and so with music and spoken word and even DJs, they bring a part of their story to the bigger story.
Yeah.
And every artist I've ever curated in my career, I spend time understanding them. I want to know their faults. I want to know their traits. I want to know what makes them happy, what makes them sad, whatever. Mm-hmm. Because the timing which I ask them will have a huge impact on the outcome of the event.
And that, I remember an early conversation that you and I had, and it was about the notion of mentorship within the art community as a whole, and how it was and you can expand on this because I'm quoting you from 5 years ago, which means my memory is going to be foggy.
Yep. Adult juice. Yep.
But I remember you specifically stating that there is the benefit and the joy of artist mentorship is that there is a level of realism that an older artist, that someone that has lived the life, walked the walk, and understands the pitfalls of the game, so to speak, can really impress on a younger artist, that really there's no way to get outside of having to fall in those particular potholes. And vice versa, there's a tremendous energy and sort of openness to learning that can often come from mentoring with a younger artist. So, I remember you saying that, and I was sitting there frantically scratching notes.
It's a two-way street. Yeah. It's always been a two-way street. Part of it, though, is you need, I guess, a mediator to challenge both generations about their assumptions about each other and why they can't get along, right? And sometimes you just have to show them. Mm-hmm. I remember when we brought on those two artists that we brought on, that my team, who's relatively young, I would say, between late 20s, early 30s, And I remember just their own initial reaction, like, man, that person's like old. I'm like, no, 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 no. They're wise, and we need that. And there's a reason why we need that, because there's a certain level of maturity that I'm looking for that will always be the expectation. I don't care how young you are. There's a certain level of maturity you have to bring, which is why I take my time investing in different artists. Yep. And there are those that are ready are the ones I want to support. And I don't mean ready in terms of wanting to be the hottest artist. Mm-hmm. I'm looking to build with those who want to build a legacy. That takes more work. That's a lifetime commitment. Absolutely. And I'm willing to invest in that, hell or high water. But these two artists that we featured, one named Valerie Stevens, who is this amazing blues entertainer, jazz entertainer. I mean, she commands the stage. I love her. And I remember my team saying to me, man, I don't know if that's going to work for this audience. I said, I bet you it will. In our first show in February 2016, we sold out of our event in a matter of a day. First event. Okay. Fitting, I think it was like 117 people in a very, very intimate space. And she closed out, and the young all-male a cappella group that opened just sat and watched her in awe about how she could command the stage.
Who did you have open? Do you remember who it was?
Oh my God, I cannot remember the a cappella group's name. Oh my goodness. Smooth, or I think is what their name is. They were like 16,
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
They're like 16, 17, and 18 at the time. Yeah. And they were like this young up and coming, like the Temptations. They just had amazing vocals. They need a little bit more work, but I just saw it. I saw when I heard them, like, I need you to open the show for this particular local artist because I see the through line. And everyone still talks about that show. Yeah. They're like, when are you going back to that venue? I'm like, the venue's changed now. They don't do music anymore. And we were one of the first musical curators in that space. Yeah. Wow. And then the second artist that we brought, though, that was seasoned, was someone who does body percussion. He's one of the few Black body percussionists I've ever met. His name is Unique Derrick. He's from California. And we brought him. Yeah. He was doing something at the Lincoln Center. He was doing fraternity style stepping, but he took you through the journey of hand bone to that. And I was so blown away that I said, I need you to come to Boston and teach hand bone. And that he did. And we had a young person open up for him, and they're like, I thought that was just stepping. I'm like, no, how we got to fraternity stepping is through hand bone. And I learned that history very quick from him, and it was amazing. Wow. You know, very seasoned guy, been around for decades, was doing very well in California, had really never come to Boston or Massachusetts because we've been labeled everything but godly. And when he saw that there was an audience, he's like, I want to come back here. Great. We will figure out how to do that.
And an audience that you've obviously engaged. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think Ethan can speak to this, but you know, the shows for me are very personal. You know, I don't want you to just sit there and observe. I want you to have fun. So I might come over and hug you. We might crack a joke. You know, I'll introduce you to my mama and my uncles. Like,
you did in fact introduce me to your mama.
You know, there's food, there's libation. Mm-hmm. This should be an extension of you, right? But that my goal is to exceed your expectations with a different type of performance, a high quality set of performances or showcases you've never experienced before, because I feel like you deserve it. And particularly in Boston and in Massachusetts, I think, you know, Black and brown people have been denied high quality shows. It's so subliminal. Most people don't pay attention to the signs, but I do all the time. Mm-hmm. And that has had a detrimental effect on what they deem as high quality. So when I go to New York or LA and I say I'm from Boston, it's just like, oh, okay, I guess, because there's an interesting assumption that we don't bring it 100%. So I work very hard to bring it, but I'm gonna bring it in the way that I want you to see that. Because my parents they got access to that. I don't. And so I'm working very hard to do that.
Yeah.
In a very cool way. But also I think preparing audiences to unlearn some bad habits so they can learn new behavior of how to experience music and art differently than what they've been subconsciously been subjected to.
Can you walk and I'm not trying to make you go down a rat hole here, but can you kind of walk us through that? Because I think what you were describing is specific to your experience, but the issue that you're talking about, I don't actually think is necessarily singularly in your community. I think all music communities, whether they're successful or not, fall into bad habits and have to go through a process of re-education and it's just human nature.
Oh, yeah.
I think so. I would love if you'd like to expound on that just a little bit more. I'd love to hear it.
Well, I think there are like when I started Bands Fest, I recognized that there were certain like high profile Grammy artists that were, Black Grammy artists that were coming to town, and the venues they were put in were so mediocre. I mean, like theaters that hadn't been renovated for hundreds of years. And you put a Grammy award-winning artist in that, specifically Black and brown people. I purposely went for research and development. I'm like, wow, this is what the promoter thinks of us?
Yeah.
No wonder our standards are low. And let alone, God forbid, you're programming or producing shows for local artists.
Yeah.
If this is what we're doing for a high-profile artist, then I know the standards are much lower for local artists. And that would piss me off.
I can only imagine. I can only imagine.
So, and so I would literally just started shopping venues, but also just redefining what I think space is. It's not conventional. It's not traditional. I don't want to always subscribe our audience to Boston culture where you just sit and you don't move and you just look, right? Yeah. Like that's horrible.
The passivity of being an audience member.
I don't have time for that. And I think what changed my world or what started me on this journey was being in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. I went to school at Temple University. I started off in mass communications. I wanted to do radio, but I got bored. So I changed my major to tourism, hospitality management. Never worked a day in hotels, but I was very fortunate to be one of the last classes to take an event management track with the godfather of events. His name is Joe Goldblatt. And I guess he wants to go play. Okay, you're going to see a little 3-year-old in the background.
I have not seen him in 2 years.
That's outstanding.
He's a hot mess. Taking that event management class and being involved in like Philadelphia in such a unique way changed my perspective about quality and the fact that just because you walk in a space doesn't mean it's the one that you're supposed to transform. Yeah. And so looking at everything, it just, that whole experience changed my life. And then doing like several internships with the mayor's office, with different venues, small, big, didn't matter. I did an amazing internship with the mayor's office for this festival that still happens called Welcome America. And at the time, I was fortunate to sit in the production and programming team. And that year they had, I got to work on the concert finale fireworks show. So I never got to deal with pyrotechnics until this internship. But that year was Patti LaBelle, John Legend, and Hall & Oates. Totally changed my mind about quality.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with 500,000 people coming to a city that has built its infrastructure of being able to service all those people, and still do it the Philadelphia way.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how can I take that model and take it home? So I came home and I just started working. I'm like, okay.
You did it. And what, man, I like every conversation I have with you, like whenever I get to be at one of your events, I mostly, as fantastic the music is, and the music's fantastic, I'm watching you because you are working the room from the moment, anyone shows up to the moment everyone's out the door. And you are doing it in a joyful, inclusive way. I believe that first show I went to, you had a member of the state senate in attendance. You did such a fantastic job of making it a space that people just want to be in.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Not just making it. Because we talk in the focusing, we talk a lot about trying to open the doors wider, making more seats at the table, and that kind of terminology. Keeping it in mind, and like one of the things that I always sort of check in my brain that I learned from you is not just about inviting people in or giving people agency. It's about giving them a space that they want to be in the first place.
Yeah.
Like those other things are important, but if they're not even interested in walking in the door, making more room ain't gonna do much.
Right.
And you do that beautifully.
Well, I mean, to me, every stranger that I meet becomes family, and that's always been a model I've used, even with my team. We're in it for the long haul, so you're just gonna have to get used to us at the end of the day. And I think what works to our favor in Massachusetts is, I would say in Massachusetts is that it doesn't take that much to invite other people to my events. Because, if they know that they had a good experience, they're going to tell all their friends, and they're going to like, I want you to meet Catherine. I want you to meet her team. I want you to meet the artists. They're super dope, right? And it's just all those things that kind of just work for themselves. But a lot of that started with just getting to know people, and I literally telling my story 50 million times until there were more people who believed in the vision and started to see like, yeah, Boston doesn't have this, or Worcester doesn't have this, or Connecticut doesn't have this. I want to see what Boston's doing. If they get it right, that means that there's a model to adopt and apply to what we're trying to do in our own home state.
And in particular, with just the way Massachusetts works, I mean, I'm trying to think of a good analogy that's not a really bad one, but like there is an amazing ability for Boston to create or foster a new culture and have that culture immediately seep into Metro North, South Boston, Cape, Worcester, Springfield. Like there are all of these different, very distinct regions, but they all take their cues from Boston.
Ironically,
now, I've lived in most of those other places, and all of them would claim that they don't, but that's not the experience that I've had.
Oh, Ethan. I feel like for all the shows that we did, so one thing I will say, there was a strategy behind the events. So part of that was I couldn't come out first year and say, I'm going to do this mega festival. It's not how that works in Boston.
Yeah.
Even as a native, you will get shut down like the government, right? So I recognized that in 2015, I had to do a series of events to build trust and buy-in and camaraderie from the community and the artists that I wanted to support. So by the time we got to the first year, I didn't have to work as hard to get their attention.
Yep.
And that's what led to 2,200 people showing up first year in the rain for 8 hours. We went so hard with it. We featured 28 artists first year with 2 stages. People thought I was crazy. So why don't do anything small? I'm a big girl. I ain't got time for that.
It's also not the way entertainment works. Like starting small, like when it comes to things that are like, can you start with a harmonica before we give you a band? It's like, no. It's not the same thing.
Nobody
I will
succeeds
never
by starting
forget.
with a 50-person festival. It's just not
Right.
You know.
And you know what I knew that we were disrupting things when the elders in the community sat and, claimed their patch of grass with their seat. And their biggest complaint was, why are there two stages? And I recognized at that moment, you've never been to a festival that had more than one stage.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay, well, this will be the format. We're going to start with two stages.
Mm-hmm.
Know that, though, in the future, I'm going to go more. But let's just start with two stages.
Yeah, you better
Right?
you better get used to 2 because it's going to be 4. And
Right. And you have to choose going back and forth because that's how it normally works in the world of festivals. So second year comes around, 2019, perfect day. Okay. 6,500 people show up. I still got two stages. The only addition I added was dance. So the festival is literally trying to present multiple disciplines from Black and Brown creative entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we got
so what
music.
you're saying is your limitation is ambition. You just don't think. You're like, we got 2 stages, but we're going to add something. We're going to add another art to the whole thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, here's the thing, though. I feel like my goal by the 10th year of this festival is that we should be sprinkled throughout Franklin Park. So for those that don't know Franklin Park, it is the largest green space in the city, but it's the one that's most underutilized. It's 527 acres of green space. About 300 of that is usable to the public. I'm trying to fulfill all of that space as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that ambitious? Yes, it's more scary to the city. It's more scary to the state.
Yeah.
Because who's doing that? I am.
Mm-hmm.
So that we can say that we actually did it, and then I can go move on and do something else. But, to be housed in Franklin Park, we're situated at a space called Playstead Field, which has been the epicenter of cultural events basically since the 50s, 60s. Haitian Day Parade, Puerto Rican Festival, the Kite Festival, you name it. That is where all Black and Brown people have done their events, have gone to events with their families. And then the leaders who are keeping those events going moved on in life.
Mm-hmm.
And so things just started to take a deep dive in terms of consistency and quality. And so the very few events that exist, which I'm glad they're still in existence, is not enough.
Yeah.
So, gentrification moves in, all of a sudden everyone has interest in this park. And I'm like, we already know the story of this. We know how this is gonna end. Yeah. So how can this festival particularly maximize every square foot of this park, drive local traffic, foot traffic, visitor traffic, tourism traffic into these neighborhoods to drive the local economy?
Yep.
How can we recognize small minority women-owned businesses? How can we challenge our politicians to see the value and the necessity of arts and culture in their neighborhoods? How do we get other industries to see the value and necessity of the arts and music as part of their own business function and model?
Yeah.
A festival is a way to do that.
Agreed. And
especially with that many people, which I think scares folks to know that many people of color live in Boston, because the only time you see them in a big space like that is downtown, City Hall.
Yep.
Yeah, I and it's interesting in a way, because what you've done is amazing, and to be met with any level of pushback by the state or by, like, Jake and I are of the age that I think both of us remember the Canadian pop folk band Bare Naked Ladies doing a show in downtown, I think literally in front of City Hall. And that was that. I think they thought 1,000 to 2,000 people would show up, and it was well over 13,000, 14,000.
Oh yeah, I think it was 2030. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the kind of thing where you had multiple people in every tree climbing it to see, and like that's just one example of like 5. But like the other examples that people use when they talk about Boston music are like not just white music, very white music. Like, all due respect to the Bare Naked Ladies, I like them a lot, but they are Canadian folk people who rap in a way that only white Canadian folk people could. So like there is, I'm trying to take my blinders off as a white person to kind of the dog whistle language that people use about events that are featuring people of color versus white, because that was one of the first sort of moments for me when I heard and it wasn't anyone saying anything negative, but I remember describing BAMS Fest to folks, and they're like, oh, but doesn't that get unruly? And I'm like, well, in good ways, yeah, but like and these are the same people that go to 30,000 person folk festivals on a hillside, and go feral for 3 days.
I think it's all about perception of people's cultural experiences. You know, I got met with so much hostility saying I was even going to do a festival because there were people before me who had messed it up, right? And so it's just like, you're going to be just like them. And I'm like, no, I'm not. That's not how I run this ship. But I remember saying to a certain city government official, and this was in 2014, when I came in with a presentation and a map and like where things are going to be. And I was told that would never happen in Boston. I said, I'll see you in 4 years. And I came back 2018 to do this festival.
I believe you
so, I came back with such a vengeance just to prove it. And this person showed up and was impressed. But I realized where that came from. There was a lot of stereotypes around Black events, Black-centered events, Black music events, because of someone else's history of how that was going to, have its effect on my event. I'm like, I don't run that kind of shit. First of all, my integrity is at stake.
Yeah.
Really? Okay, that's fine.
You're raising a performer.
You can come get him. It's fine. We're family here. So, 3-year-olds. So,
he knows better than I do.
The amount of hostility that I was met with had to deal with some interesting assumptions that my event was going to fail for the simple fact that I was Black.
Yeah.
Easy. And fortunately for me, what scared people the most was that I had a plan. A plan. There was an assumption that, being a Black woman, being a Black person, that I was going to be unorganized. And I'm like, no. My education would never allow me to do that.
And I find that part of it just so funny is not the right word, and I apologize because I can't find the right word, but I find so many events are done without that deep level of planning, and every moment of every conversation I have ever had with you is evidence of a lot going on behind those glasses. And for someone to make an assumption like that it's one of those things where I know people wouldn't like the phrase, well, that's clearly racist, but it's clearly dismissive in a way that probably can't be attributed to anything but racism, or perhaps misogyny. It could be both, bedfellows and all.
There was that too. I think for me, like I said, my life experiences have prepared me for every fork in the road towards getting this festival off the ground, to start my organization. I'm an alumni of a program called MECO, which stands for the Metropolitan Council for Educational Opportunities. Yep, it's long as hell. But at the time, MECO came out of the desegregation of schools.
Yep.
and they would take inner city kids to the suburbs to further their education. And every time I'm interviewed about the MECO program, I would say it wasn't the education that actually made me better, because I already had that part. It was really all of the injustices that I faced that afforded me the prep of dealing with crazy ass people.
Mhm.
And so to be dismissed when I said I was going to do this festival, I'm like, oh, I've seen your type. That I dealt with that in high school. All right, well, I know how to work around that. I'm gonna keep moving. Like that. That wasn't going to deter me from doing. Were there moments where I cried and I was like, I don't understand my city? Yes, I've had many of those, still do. But there's not a place I can't go in Boston, which is really great more now than ever, where people are like, oh, that's BAMs. They're good.
Yeah.
Like they bring it. You never have to worry about quality. You never have to worry about, they think through what they're going to present, and you can see that the people that they intentionally select. I'm like, that took years of development because I had to build trust with folks, even ones that were racist.
Yeah.
To say that Boston and the state of Massachusetts could look very different. Whether you want to give me a chance or not, I'm still going to be in your face, kind of like the Rona. I'll still be in your face, whether you like me or not.
I'm not going away.
Not going away. You're going to see
God.
this logo everywhere. And even working with less, the quality of the festival first year, people were like, oh, this must have cost a fortune. I'm like, you want to talk about bare bones and a lot of prayer and begging and in-kind support? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I refuse to settle for less.
I'm curious. So one of the things that we run into a lot in Boston is that there are invisible lines between communities, between music scenes. So you're putting on a festival. I'm Ethan and I both, we're very active in the folk music scene, as we said, the roots and Americana music scenes. So Cambridge has a very distinct scene. It's very white, admittedly, but I also think that there's a lot of fantastic music there. But Cambridge and Somerville, everybody plays there, and I know hardly anybody that plays over in Boston. There's a different music scene across the river in Brighton and Allston. There's rock music scene over there. I've gone to the BMAs a couple of times with one of my bands, and here are a whole bunch of bands I've never even heard of.
Yep.
And so I'm very curious. So you're putting on events. This festival, for example, in Franklin Park. What have you seen in terms of challenges of just getting people, either from just your community or from outside the community to come to it? Because black, brown, white, or whoever, getting me to come out of Cambridge and Somerville is hard enough.
Yeah.
How does that work for you? What have you run into with that? Because Boston, that is the thing, in Boston.
Yeah, I would say this, that when we developed a series called the Prelude series, and the Prelude series was meant to take different communities on journeys across greater Boston neighborhoods, to your point, because of that issue. I remember getting into an argument with a patron who came to the event saying, oh my God, I live in Cambridge, Boston's too far. I said, and how often do you go to Rhode Island?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm literally being very frank with people about perception of distance is what keeps you from actually enjoying the finer things in life. And Boston has been really great about that, and not in a good way. The state of Massachusetts has been really great about that, and not in a good way, in terms of the imagery of each, the reputation of each neighborhood has an effect on how far people are willing to travel to go experience that.
Yeah.
So if you know that Dorchester and Roxbury are bad, but there's a really great show in there, but all of that media, all the things you've heard are going to prevent you from even going there. And you missed out on a great opportunity to listen to some badass music, right?
Yep.
Same thing in Cambridge. We would get it all the time. We had Dorchester people, and I love Dorchester, but we would have Dorchester folks like, oh, Cambridge is so far. And I'm like, you mean to tell me that you want to miss out on a 3-hour show that's $20 with food because you have beef with Cambridge and you live in Dorchester, but you're willing to go to New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island that's twice as long in gas money.
You've met Boston, right?
So it's always putting things into perspective and earlier, creating a space that people want to go to. So educating our Boston community about the spaces in Cambridge, educating the Cambridge community about spaces in Boston, and highlighting them, right? Like that's what I mean, like really walking into a space and understanding what is the prep work you have to do for audiences who may not have typically even been welcome there. And that is where we thrive. We know that historically in Boston has and continues to be the most racist city for whatever reason in the country. And that there were certain neighborhoods where certain racial groups of people could not go, period. Has that changed? Yes. Is it 100% good? No. But we have to start challenging people's mentality of of the nostalgic part of Boston that has been hanging over us for so long, to say, no, South Boston has changed. East Boston has changed. Cambridge looks different. Austin Brighton looks different. Brockton looks different. And here are some amazing, talented people that are going to show you, what they want you to experience, because they're going to bring themselves to that space because they're so proud of where they're from.
And I know that we're talking about something very, very specific, but I think the principles here are far broader than that. My question, to you is where you've seen success or how you've seen success in bridging those gaps. I have a hard enough time getting somebody to come to a gig in Cambridge on a Thursday night, and it is on the tee, and it's a cool bar, and it's a great music scene, and the band is killer.
And there's no charge. There's no
cover charge. That's right. And there's no cover charge. And people are like, it's a long way to go, or I don't know if it's going to be too loud. Like,
to be fair, your shows do start at 10 p.m. on a weeknight, but
they do start at 10 p.m. But it's Thursday, so you could start your weekend early. And when this is back, Catherine, I invite you to one of these nights because I think you'd have a blast. We had Gangsta Grass in there March. So this is a 10-piece rock band in a 60-person club. We had
Randy Dolio
Sleuth and Dan Whitener on banjo. And Brian Farrow on fiddle, jumping in with that band. I'll send you videos. It was a trip. I might have beatboxed at one point. Sleeves lost her mind. But anyway,
I was there. Can confirm.
Ethan helped drag them over from House of Blues. But how have you found success in bridging those gaps? That's the hardest thing. And again, I think it's a very broad principle. We're talking about a specific example here in Boston, but how have you found success broadening the tent? We talk about that a lot on the podcast.
I think what I recognize that Boston as a city has failed to do is be consistent. Consistency is key. If you're going to come out swinging, you better come out swinging every single time, because you set your own bar of expectation, and that's where the audience is going to hold you accountable. So the first 3 years of our organization, we did like 6 to 12 events a year. I know that's insane, but I knew that at some point we would do less of that because we wouldn't have to prove ourselves at that point. That no matter that after so many amounts of events, that people would just know, okay, that's BAMS. I already know what I'm getting, period. You cannot, knowing how stubborn and ignorant Massachusetts is as a people, as a culture.
I was there, can verify. Gonna keep the messaging.
We have always been people have failed us. And so it's hard to believe that there's someone or people who are intentional about being in our lives all the time, because there's an expectation that you're going to leave at some point. It's the same thing with events. And there's a psychology behind that. And so, in understanding behavior of people, I can't always do a music show. I have to do other things. But you're going to know that every couple of weeks or months, you'll see bands again, right?
Yep.
And by the time we got to the festival, where I saw success was when the same people started showing up, and then they bring a friend.
Yep.
I'm like, oh, we're on to something here. And we would have like a dedicated, 100 bands fans. That's what we call them. And they would just, whether they were into music or not, they would show up. Either it was on the strength of me, or it was on the strength of what we were bringing.
Yeah.
And that they walked away with meeting a new person, being in a neighborhood they've never seen before, or that their perception of that neighborhood was totally changed by our event. Not alone, but partly.
Yeah.
That the encouragement of the venue or space that we were in was to challenge them to be more open to diverse audiences and diverse music.
Yeah.
And that's a hard change, because if you're only known for one thing, but you're saying you want to be diverse, then you have some bias you have to address.
Yes. Yeah. No.
Even for us as an organization, like our assumption about certain venues, I'm like, yeah, they would never allow us in there. And we're like, well, why do we think that, right?
Mm-hmm. And
really start understanding, where does that come from? And then be bold enough to ask, would you have us?
Mm-hmm.
And here's the reason. Here is the value proposition that we bring, right?
Okay.
And again, just the same people showing up, but then we also realized the types of artists that were coming to us. That it was starting to be mainly music, then it ventured into spoken word, and then dance, and then visual art. Then film, then theater. So while our core base are primarily musicians, there's all these other disciplines that find us to be valuable, which is amazing, which is completely out of my hands, because that's not how I started this vision. But
isn't there? Sorry, not to cut you off, but I think you're pulling a really interesting string, because one of the things that I'm currently sort of pondering is, does art never exists in a vacuum? You can't have art without audience. You can't have art without other art that provides the framework for, there is so much interdependency in the way that pretty much every form of art ends up being taken in, that the fact that you created a model that worked for musicians, the fact that same model worked for dancers, theater people, whomever, that's not shocking to me. And even more so, I love the notion that now you're creating some cross-pollination between those artists that's probably immensely powerful for them.
It is. I think, again, to my earlier point, for me personally, I play a lot of the mediator, because to Jake's question about what have been some of the challenges, one is I didn't understand the tension between musicians, dance, within their own discipline. Musicians have beef with other musicians. Dancers didn't like other dancers. I'm like, wait a minute. To the consumer, we don't care.
Right.
We just want to celebrate your work. So, well, thank you. We just want to celebrate your work. So all that tension is what causes that particular discipline to lose its value.
Yeah.
Because y'all got beef.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here like, if you aspire to make this your full-time practice, get over the ego of you having issues with other folks. We don't do that here.
Yeah. On top of which, at least from within our little microcosm of music, we have found that having a booker that loves you is awesome, but having other musicians that love you very often works out even better for you, because those other musicians are the ones that are going to be recommending you, because no musician can play the same venue 365 days a year. That's not how it works.
No.
So being able to foster those relationships between artists really helps. It's trite, but like my life motto is the entire rising tide lifts all boats thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when practiced, I feel that it's true. When half-assed, I feel that it is not.
No, I definitely agree with you. I do. It's been amazing, some of the tension we've been able to break.
Yeah.
And that's just because someone had to play mama. That's gonna be me. And show people that, the only person you should ever be in competition with is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's no one else. That's the only way that you're going to get better. But you can't do that alone. You have to do that through collaboration and shared work in a way that's going to elevate what you're doing, but also the overall discipline and ecosystem that you're a part of. Yeah. And what we recognized is that a lot of individual folks, please stop, thank you. A lot of individual folks didn't realize that they were part of an ecosystem because no one ever told them.
Yep.
So we had to literally break down the industry, the ecosystem that arts and culture ecosystem is connected to live events industry and tourism hospitality management.
Yep.
And a lot of times we don't see those connections because we're just playing this small part in the overall ecosystem. But without arts and culture, the live events industry doesn't thrive. Mm-hmm. And the tourism industry doesn't generate any revenue. Because that's why people travel all the time.
Right.
But to some degree, isn't it kind of just because we've created this American mythos of the hero is the person that does it all on their own, that doesn't, the cowboy that comes in from the West with just his grit or, whatever. And, that has become so much a part of sort of the American story that even when it's abundantly clear that it's malarkey, sorry, that's the oddest choice of words I've gone with tonight. But like, even
There's
when
children in the room, you're being good.
even when, and not to delve directly into politics, but just to use an example because it's so clear, when people say, "Well, Trump's a self-made man," it's like, what could possibly make you think that? Like, what part of him was self-made?
Well, that can be argued. There's some parts of him that are self-made, yes. But I get your point. I think, one thing I recognize about Massachusetts or New England, subconsciously, we individually have a championship mentality because that's how we brag ourselves to the rest of the world.
Yep.
And that has a tremendous effect on how we engage with each other and actually experience life. Mm-hmm. Is we want to do it individualistically because of how the culture is driven and permeates throughout everything we do. Even if you're in Maine, if you're connected, it doesn't even matter.
Yeah. There
are certain cultural things that we have holistically set out to the rest of the world. New England champions. We have the best hospitals, the best school systems, right? All that is a first mentality. That's a singular mentality that has an effect on our inability to collaborate all the time. Mm-hmm. And we always have to do it ourselves. Now imagine if that wasn't the case, what would that look like for arts and music?
Oh, it would be astonishing.
It looked very different.
Yeah.
That's why, the Atlantas or the Philadelphias or the LAs can get ahead because that champion mentality is collective, not singular.
Yeah.
There's the belief that if one artist makes it, the other ones come up too.
Yeah.
Versus here, it is very singular. And that takes work. That's a lifetime commitment to changing that. And I do my part to do that in a very interesting and aggressive and unapologetic but sympathetic way, because it's my hope that by the time my son grows up, music will sound so much different. It will sound much more connected, and that the most unlikely genres or disciplines that you never think would ever come together do, and they change the game.
Amen. I mean, that's the way, and we need more of yous
I
out
hope
there
there's more
because
out there.
we're always on the hunt, but no one's better as of yet. Uh, you know, we'll sort of way into a conversation about COVID because I really would love to sort of hear you guys. Clearly, this changed the game for you, but just to sort of wrap our last conversation into it, I think to go back to the notion of sort of cultural individuality, I think that's kind of the reason we fail culturally as Americans with this entire COVID thing. Because when COVID started happening, we sold a record amount of toilet paper and we sold a record amount of guns because people had these movies, these zombie movies in their head and these end of the world movies, and they wanted to be the hero that had the gun and solve the problem when the solution to the problem was just stay home. Stay home, which ironically, stay home and don't do anything, which is ironically something that I feel like Americans also excel at, but if we're told to do it, we're not good at it.
Absolutely not.
For
So,
sure.
like, there's that weird sort of thing where if you just act, I'm trying to remember the name of the book. There's a great book. I'm going to paraphrase the name, but something like Paradises That Are Born Out of Hell or something like that, and it's about all of sort of world natural disasters like the fires in San Francisco and Katrina and all of these things, and how the immediate aftermath of local people, the people that live in those areas, is almost always universally positive. There are stories in San Francisco when the fires went out of a little old lady in her 70s that literally owned a single plate and cup, starting a soup kitchen, starting a giant tent city food kitchen in the span of days. There are stories of the local meat packaging plant literally going down, opening up the doors and saying, everyone come take whatever you need because it's going to go bad anyway. And there's sort of that consistent behavior. I think that people, when they're faced with hardship, it is the natural inclination. How do you help? It's when you're given the opportunity to overthink it and you introduce, and I am generally a pro-government kind of person, but you introduce the nature of, well, I have to go and improve my value and, this, that, the other thing. It's anyway, I am thankful that there are people like you that are connecting people in a real way and in real conversations, because I think it makes all of us better in the end. And with that being said, let's talk about COVID.
Auntie Rona.
Yeah. Is it Chris Matthews? Chris Matthews introduced us to the Crow is how she calls it. The Crow.
Thank God. What do you want to know, Ethan?
So clearly they're not the people that are thought of first when it comes to who's affected by this, but the artistic community is being decimated. Venues are closing. Artists are, I have a good friend who is a touring artist making a living as a touring artist, and now he's cleaning plates at a local restaurant. And I'm concerned, obviously, for my fellow creatives, but I'm also really concerned about primarily, or to at least as much of an extent, for the people like you who have been moving heaven and earth to create opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
And we are now in a place where the notion is people aren't looking to grow right now. People are looking to survive right now.
Yes.
Which ironically might be the best time to grow, but that's another thing. How has that worked with you? Because I've seen you with your team. you guys are close.
Yes.
You are family.
We are family. COVID, I mean, you want to talk about, I was trying to think about what to name 2020 besides my mother saying the year that never was. To me, 2020 was a year of transition, like in ways that we've never ever seen before. Just before COVID hit, we had just completed as an organization our first strategic plan that we never got to actualize.
Oh, jeez.
We were about to do a 2 headliner festival. Like we were going to go big in 2020.
I
All
was
that good shit.
my biggest disappointment with the timing of all of this is I had spent months looking forward. You invited me. You bought me a ticket to one of your events, and I still have it on my calendar. The Hamiltons at the Isabella Stewart Museum.
Mm-hmm.
I was so looking forward to that.
That was going to be a great show, by the way.
No doubt.
Like, oh, when's that coming back? Working on it. So, things just totally shifted, and we had like a very oh shit moment. Like, what are we going to do? Because it became very real that it wasn't just about a health pandemic, that literally the world was going to change, and it wasn't going to benefit people of color. And this was at the beginning of Ahmaud Arbery, before we got to George Floyd. And so, people thought this thing was going to go in like 4 or 5 weeks. And, we started to just see the headlines, and we started looking at all the other major festivals around us, and they were just canceling left and right.
Yep.
And, what's so beautiful about Black and brown people is their optimism. It's just like, no, let's just, wait till the last possible moment. I'm like, we cannot do that. Especially as Black and brown people, we cannot do that. So we canceled the festival, and I started to see how affected our board and staff were. So for those that don't know, Bands Fest right now is made up of 8 volunteers, where we collectively give between 15 to 20,000 hours a year of our time. Okay, a lot of time.
Yep.
So I do this for free, mind you. And I have a full-time side hustle. And
That's how it works in this business.
It's how it works in the biz. People just don't understand.
Said the accordion player.
So I asked my board and my staff to go home, just go prioritize self-care for a couple of months, because I had to figure out how I was going to process this. Because at the end of the day, no one's looking at the team, no one's looking at the board, they're looking at how's Catherine going to move in this, right? Because there was this expectation, we've been consistent. Yep. So how do you become consistent in a pandemic? And so over the summer, I literally had like 4 or 5 brain trusts with different people who love the organization but weren't in the operations of it, to say, here are 4 main things I want to do to set us up for success in 2021. But how do I do this? Because this started off as a passion that has turned into my volunteer full-time job that I want to see succeed.
Yep.
But I don't have all the fundamentals. With all the education I've gone through, I don't have all the fundamentals. But all of you all do. So help me make this better, because you love Bands Fest. And so we worked on, what is going to be our digital infrastructure? What are going to be our new business activities to support our organization? How are we going to show up differently for artists? How are we going to shift our language? What is going to be the succession planning for me after I leave? Because no one talks about that. I'm not going to stay here and do this forever.
No, they don't.
And what is going to be the structure for Bands Festival indefinitely? Because COVID was going to change our lives. So that took about 4 or 5 months. And we gained all these new people who just have seen the organization differently, because they've had intimate conversation with me about how I'm thinking about things. Yep. And so although the festival couldn't happen in June, we did a virtual Black Music Month DJ series, where we asked 5 DJs to curate a playlist that answered the question, why do you love Black music so much? And they were talking through each record that they loved as they were DJing in front of a live audience. It was amazing. Then one of our partners, the Esplanade Association, said, hey, we know nothing about virtual events. We just saw you did one. Would you curate a weekly virtual event every Monday throughout the month of August? I said, sure, why not? It was going to allow us to test out my theories about could we sustain doing virtual programming with music, particularly because that is a over sensory experience for consumers. It's not just the audio, it's everything.
Yeah.
And to do that with a laptop is a little hard. So we tested it out, and about 200 people showed up virtually for each event that was free, mind you. And we did 7 live stream performances and a DJ set. So we tested out that model. Then one of the artists that we worked with said, hey, I'm doing a virtual album release party. Could you sponsor? Absolutely. We're just going to be in the year of just testing everything out. That went well because she did it in animation. I've never seen animation done for a virtual album release party. It was amazing.
No kidding.
Oh, it was great. Her name
I
is
wanna
Red
see
Shades. She killed it for us. And then
Red
COVID,
Shades?
Red Shades. She was one of the performers for Bands Festival 2019. And then, COVID did this up and down thing where like, hey, you can kind of go outside, but you got to be socially distant. So then there was an event called Power to the People Rally that we sponsored just to get a pulse of what would it look like for 1,000 people to show. It wasn't our event. We were just sponsoring it. And 1,000 people showed up on a Saturday for like 6 hours. Okay. It wasn't called a festival. It's called a rally. But whatever, language speaks differently. And they had a stage, they had vendors, they had food. I'm like, interesting. So there's hope in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got one of our biggest breaks, and we did something with Berkshire Bank called Versus or Vibes Battle. It was our first virtual music battle with 3 artists that we pre-selected over the summer to compete for their spot for 2021 festival.
Was this you ran a really great video with 4 judges in early December? That's what that was?
Yeah, December 18th.
That was really well done.
Thank you. I told you now, consistency. So, I'm a huge fan of The Voice. I like The Voice, but I was just like, how could I make this feel like BAM? So we kind of did like the ESPN thing with the four
Yep.
square.
Yep.
But what was really amazing but challenging was there was about to be a second wave of the virus. Yeah. And we were pre-recording those performances and venues that were on my wish list of venues I wanted to say I was going to do something in.
Yeah.
So one of those venues was the Wang Theater. It is a beautiful space. It's one of the second largest theaters in the country.
Yes, it is.
I said, one day in my life, I'm going to do something in this space. Don't know how much money it's going to cost me. So we were able to, through a great relationship with the president, Joe Spalding, said, hey, we want to do this thing virtually. There's no audience, nothing. Yep. But we want to feature your space, right? Like you're still open, but knowing that we can only do things without an audience. And so he allowed us to pre-record 2 artists who had also had a beautiful wish of being in that space to pre-record their performances. Then we went over to Cambridge, the Bridge Sound and Stage, that's owned by an artist, the Archetype. He's a producer. And I said, hey, we want to highlight your venue with this event. And we pre-recorded everything. It was just done with such class. Like the creative director did an amazing job. And we built this whole campaign around doing this virtual battle. And we had over 1,000 viewers. I was very happy. Very, very happy.
It was really well done, and you also all four of they were really thoughtful, and I tend not to like shows like The Voice and American Idol because someone always wants to be the Simon Cowell, like I'm going to be the angry person, and you didn't, and it was basically everyone giving their honest opinions. Not everyone liked everything, not everyone disliked, but it was like, well, you could. Here's why it doesn't work for me. If they had thought about it in this way, and I was sitting there being like, I'm sending this to every musician I know, regardless of whether this is their kind of music or not. This is the thought process that we should all be going through.
Yeah, and I felt like, in watching people's, like, artists have to be careful what they put on social media because I'm very nosy. So I was looking at Instagram stories, I was looking at Facebook. I was just like, what are people? You still came to our show. Absolutely. So I was just like, what are artists doing in times of COVID, right? And there was a lot of emotional labor that was going on. There was a lot of emotional strain. Mm-hmm. And I said, but the beautiful thing about being an artist is you have a gift that no one can tell you can't do. You get to create all day. Not many people can do that, right? So to do this battle was a chance to challenge artists, musicians specifically, to show what they've been doing during this time of COVID. Yeah. And that even in a time of dismay, even when something is going wrong for a show, you still have to show up and perform. Yeah. And this was an opportunity to do that, even though it was virtual. Mm-hmm. But you didn't have to pay for a music video. I did it for you. You just had to show up and present who you are. Mm-hmm. And they did. And the audience loved it. The amount of comments we were getting back. But what was really, really a great thing for the artists was the prize. And we thought very hard about this prize. Now, it was $5,000 worth in cash and prizes, right? So it's $1,000 cash prize. You got 10 hours of recording time, rehearsal time. Yep. You got a professional photo shoot. You secured your spot for 2021. So now we've added another slot to the festival, right? And you got one-on-one brand management, artist management consultation, which is an artist's dream.
Absolutely. Because no one's ever going to say that money isn't valuable because money is clearly valuable. Mm-hmm. But the ability to say, not only are we going to give you this basic thing so that you can eat, but we're going to get you the 4 or 5 things that you need in order to be able to flourish at what you're doing. Yes. And that's
teaching somebody to fish, to use the old analogy.
Well, even better, you're outfitting, you're getting someone a pole. You can teach someone to fish all you want, but if they don't have a pole in line, kind of shit out of luck. And it goes back, and again, what I just want to point out, because it's the consistency in which you do things that I find as impressive as I do, is you have tied together people that not everyone always thinks of as artists, like the photographers to get the high quality photos, the producers and everything else. And it is, again, it takes a village to raise a musician.
I think so.
That's great.
It was one of those projects it was one of those events for me where I actually got to sit back and watch the fruit of my labor. Now, that's a hard thing to do when you're doing consistent things. Mm-hmm. But to see it all pan out with the judges, to see the performances happen, the voting. So what was very unique, we have never done voting before, even though this last year was the year of voting, but we did voting in 2 ways. You can either vote online through our website, or you can vote by text. And we had over 800 votes for these 3 artists. Again, in times of COVID, we're like, what? What do you mean? So it was really great to see that there's an audience and that there was a thirst for us to do that battle again, but not with New England-based artists, internationally. Yeah.
Oh wow!
I didn't realize folks were watching from other countries. I'm like, we didn't even promote it like that, But
right.
Which is
the power of social media.
Which is really what I think the interesting part when we're talking earlier about people just trying to survive through this as opposed to grow. And I kind of made the crack about, ironically, this is one of the good times to grow if you can. Part of that really is driven by the fact that no one is touring. You are no longer restricted to the city that you are playing in that night.
No.
You can be heard and focused on from anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And we have friends. Jesse Terry, a good friend of ours. Jesse every year did 2 tours in Europe and 1 tour in New Zealand every year. So he toured the States really robustly. And, you know, this is a guy that, like, he probably sells out, like, small clubs, like 50-person clubs. He sells those out easy as pie. 100-person clubs, probably good showing most of the time. But, like, he's not one of those guys that's like the A card selling out festivals where you put his name on your festival and 300 people show up. But he's a working musician. And what I've adored seeing in him is he's started doing a weekly show from his daughter's playroom, and she's literally playing, or his 2-year-old daughter's playing around him while he's playing. But he has a couple hundred people on average show up for this thing from all over the place, because these people that love him in New Zealand but only got to see him for like maybe once a year for a week if they, you know, got out to see him, can now see him every week.
Right.
And like I'm still trying to internal the best way to start blending the worlds together, because eventually we're going to have to start figuring that part out.
Yeah, and I think that's what's been scary to a lot of artists. You know, we had some trouble with artists who, when it came to pre-recording their performance in a venue that is going to be requiring artists to be tested, let alone be vaccinated. That's going to be a part of
That's going to be
the credentials.
We've had so many challenges in the past year, and the challenges we're going to face in the next year as we transition back into a real world. We hadn't wrapped our brain around the shit that we just went through in the last year.
No, we
We're not
haven't.
even ready for this next year.
And the sad part is, when we get to March, it'll almost be like the commemoration for like 9/11. It's like we have survived a whole year of COVID since
whole
March.
year of this.
Well, that's
Yeah.
like the two stats this week that hit home for me. One I think was as of last Tuesday, and it's that at this point in the loss of life, 1 in 1,000 Americans have died of COVID. That is such a real and
That's close.
terrifying number.
Yeah.
Like that is, and the second one was essentially every day is a 9/11 level loss of life.
Every day. Yep.
Every day. And those sort of that's what, like, I'm a firm believer in art. Art is what makes us unique. I think in the way that we create art, and it is the thing that gives us reason to live as opposed to just things to do.
For sure.
But I'm trying to be so mindful of the fact that there is a reality to the world that is simply going to make it so. You know, I was in a peer group for artists last week, and there was an older artist that just sat there and said, "Man, I can't wait till we all. I'm gonna start playing shows the second that we can." And I'm just like,
No.
why would you? Like, and I don't even mean that. Like, don't get me wrong. I want to hug you bad. I would love a Catherine hug. I would love to get out there and see that my near and dear and be able to spend time with them. But like, until I know everyone's got the vaccine, until I know that it's real and like we're not opening ourselves up for a bunch of other stuff, I'm not jumping in that lake.
I hear you. I think what is unfortunate is our inability as individuals to grapple with it's going to be a different normal. You know, getting back to is not a thing anymore. It's how are you going to pivot to adjust to the changes that enhance the normality that we're used to that's going to look different. I mean, not even just for artists being tested, but audiences now too. You know, there are apps, there are going to be venues requiring you have to show proof that you are COVID free.
Yep.
And if you don't, you may not even get a refund. How about that?
And can you imagine the local bar that has the stick of 50 years of beer still on the ground, now having to disinfect every object in the room every night? Like,
they couldn't do that before COVID.
Well, that's my point. Anyway, I don't want to derail us, but you guys put out a really fantastic video on what makes you guys special. In my mind, I think it's a really great video, and I want to toss that up just because I know we occasionally start losing people about an hour and a half in. So we'll play that now, and I'm going to toss up the link to donate if people are interested. And we'll archive all of it anyway. But thanks everyone for being here. We're gonna run a video and we'll be back in 6 or 7 minutes.
Being a part of BAMS Fest has allowed me to see the vast opportunity in this local scene in Boston. There's a lot of sectors of the arts that already are here in the city. So I think that being a part of BAMS Fest has allowed me to understand the inner workings of how arts impacts and moves within a city ecosystem.
I started BAMS Fest basically through my college experiences in Philadelphia. I love the city. It's great. It's got an artsy culture scene. And I participated in 2 different internships that changed my life and really persuaded me that events and festivals were the pipeline for talent, convening community, and exploring creative imagination. So I came home to Boston and looked around and recognized there was not a festival that really centered on and elevated Black artists, creative entrepreneurs, and what Black artistry has contributed to the city's narrative identity. I started to understand I had to create smaller events and opportunities for cultural exchange and artistic expression and access to arts and culture for Black and brown people over a course of time. And so for the first 3 or 4 years, we would do anywhere from 6 to 12 events a year, garnering the support and trust of our community about our ability to be able to actually produce a large-scale festival.
It's interesting when you think about the narrative that you hear about Boston in the mainstream media. You know, you hear things about racism in Boston, the rigidity of the people, and one of the main things I think BAMS Fest has done is completely, pulled the wig off of that. I feel like the legwork that Catherine and the entire BAMS Fest team has done over the past decade has really shown that there's a real appetite for these types of events and these types of programs and, music that is really supporting local artists, that is supporting local entrepreneurs and is really investing in the community.
My relationship being involved with BAMS Fest has solidified my practice and being able to have a platform to give back and stand up for what Black Boston is about. There's so many things that we have memories of, and there's so many ways that when we go other places, people don't believe we live this far up north. So BAMS is definitely the crest that I rock so proud when it comes down to being able to do things that are visible and celebrated, performed, curated, and put together by everybody that looks like this. So it's a powerful movement.
My impression was I was just finally happy to see that we had something. And by we, I mean like that Black people or Black woman, from what I was seeing at the time, was running something that represented the culture, represented the people, represented the city in a real meaningful way.
I see BAMS Fest as being a North Star for all people, but specifically for radical imagination for people of color. And that how that's supported is where BAMSFest inserts itself. We're not here to tell you how to create, but we are here to holistically support you in the infrastructure, the tools, the knowledge, the space, the environment, the people you need to know to be your most authentic and creative self. Because the majority of us consume it.
It challenged me to be able to take each time and make it count and not give it all in one spot, but just to lead a trail to what would be the bigger event, the bigger fest, and just put on anybody that I've been exposed to or saw to everyone else that needs to see it.
When you support BAMSFest, you support a community of individuals who live here, who are a part of the community, who care about seeing change and being a part of that change, who are thinking about the individuals who live here, are thinking about the communities who often feel othered, who don't see themselves in physical spaces, in programming, in digital content.
When you support BAMSFest, you support Black women, artists, arts and culture, changing the paradigm, changing the landscape of art in Boston and beyond, arts entrepreneurship, women, Black women. You support growth.
When you support BAMSFest, you're supporting Boston artists making a statement. Bam.
People should support BAMSFest if you are committed to equitable change for all people. We're at a pivotal moment in our generation, our time, where if we don't start valuing arts and culture as a norm in our life, it's going to look very dull in the future.
Yep. I love that last line. I think it is absolutely a truth that when a culture gets to the point that it stops investing in the cultural pillars of what makes up the personality of a culture, it's when you see things sort of start deteriorating. We had a great question come in from one of the folks that has been a regular watcher for a while, Don Sheldon.
Hi, Don.
And asking if we found any new platforms, opportunities that you think will linger or flourish when we return to some convention of whatever normal would be in live performances, and has the adversity opened up new things that you wouldn't have considered otherwise?
That's a really great question. Thank you, Dawn, because we've learned a lot about technology in the short period of time that we needed to learn. I think, I think outside of COVID or any other kind of, jokes that have been made about 2020, Zoom was probably the one I did not want to hear anymore because I was zoomed out. I didn't want to be a Zombie.
Yeah.
But
I haven't heard that. I like that.
Nice. Yeah.
It was vampire-ish by the time 2 o'clock hit, so Zombie. But I think, technologies like YouTube Music, Twitch, StreamYard, Hopin.com, I think these live streaming platforms are going to have a huge effect on live performances. One, because until we get to a point where we're all vaccinated and feel safe around each other, people now have a much more control over whether they want to risk being out in the public or enjoying it from the comfort of their own home and still expect the same level of quality, even though they're not there. And that can be either dangerous, or you can get really creative and figure out how to add more to that if someone's not physically there.
And that's what I think. What I think's interesting is looking at the quality of how people have approached streaming music and the notion of what that as a product is, has really evolved in what I've seen in the 6, 8, 10 time is relative now. Amount of times since all of this started, but we just did a holiday special, and you were one of the first people I sent it to after we did it, because this in a lot of ways this was us playing with the notion of what is a live event. Because I remember, like, I'm technically just shy of being, like, I think I'm too young to be able to remember this, meaning I probably saw it in reruns. But like the 70s and 80s Christmas specials, like when, Bing Crosby's like, "Oh, who's at the door? David Bowie. Who would have imagined?" Like this sort of contrived thing. But like there was a sense of spectacle to those kind of events. Like they really had, regardless of whether they were live or not, there was something really special about them. And because technology has done what technology does, the ability to pull off something like that now is actually it. If you have a couple iPhones, and
you're real creative,
you can do some pretty crazy stuff.
You can. I think to your point is this ultimate question: what is a live performance now?
Yeah.
There's the conventional way we think about it, but what does it mean to do a live performance? And more now than ever, all of us in this creative industry have to really depend on each other. Yep. Even though folks are out of work in certain industries, this is a moment where you really get to reinvent the wheel of how you want to engage with live performances. Yep. Theatrics will always be there, but now you got to step it up.
Yep.
It's not just sitting in front of your laptop. Yep. You got to add animation, lights, sound. I mean, you name it. A special. Access to special content. Like there's just all these other things that what we relied on to be face-to-face now is not that anymore. Yeah. It's that plus more. And so it's like how much more willing are artists and those that support them willing to go to still connect to their audiences, to still keep that genre or discipline alive and thriving in the lives of people because they need it. And how far are you willing to go to do that? Yeah. And so I think the existing platforms that are happening will always allow for that connection. I think what has been interesting is the amount of protection around intellectual property because of live streaming. Yeah. And monetization of content, and who's sampling, who's original, like all these things that we used to question are now under a microscope because industries or big corporations have taken advantage of that situation of the small
to absurd levels for years and years.
And even with this now, it's just put much more of a microscope on the issues that will affect the platforms that currently exist. Now, what I'll say to Don's question further on is, what it had, even though, with Auntie Rona being what it is, it's what I've really loved and learned so much about these platforms is that we get to really challenge the art of collaboration, where, we now get to reach back into our network of alumni artists from Chicago and New York and Philadelphia and say, hey, now's the time to actually collaborate with a Boston artist. Like, how do we do that? And how do we capture that experience, the magic behind the creation, have a conversation, then you get to see the end product. Because audiences now, as we learn, are much more interested in the lived experiences, not just the end product. Yeah. They want to know the how-to, the DIYs, the intimacy of the intricacies of these artists that are considered subhuman or superhuman, even though we're normal. About our thought process and how we live and our family life. Like, we never got to do that before. Now, because you're sitting at home and you can see kids running through the background and whatever, folks are more interested, which is great. You get to understand the humanity in the artist.
We're engaging people on a very personal level that... in folk music, we do that a lot in terms of like breaking down that wall and chatting with people in the audience and, hanging around after the show. And this has been, you can see my Hadestown poster
Yeah.
over there. So clearly I'm a Broadway nerd. And then you can see my, little posters for Enceladus, and I'm a space nerd. Like, you get those little glimpses. Now we're curating our Zoom calls,
Yes.
by that. But it's a really interesting sort of view, especially for the people that love it. And look, I mean, isn't that why one of the reasons why Twitter and those sort of social medias took off? Because you could interact with the artists in that way, and this is kind of literally bringing you into their homes.
It's been really great to see. It's been really great to see how artists think through how they want to tell their own story.
Yep.
And it's like you really now have complete control over that content. So how do you want to do it?
Yeah.
So there are some artists whose life I don't want to see, but there are those I'm actually curious to see. On stage you're an extrovert, but in person you're an introvert. So how are you going to make this work now in a virtual setting? Is what I love to see.
And what kind of experience are you cultivating? Are you cultivating because there are performers that can still look like they're wearing the superhero capes when they're performing, even in their small little office. There are performers that can manage that.
Yeah.
But there are other performers that get real intimate real quick.
For sure.
And there are new formats of running event. Like I'm not going to talk mean about anybody, but I went the New Year's Eve show that I went to had a after show Zoom meeting where all the audience was invited to come for question. And as it turns out, inviting a bunch of people at 1 a.m. on New Year's Day to talk to an artist.
Ooh, that is okay. Yeah. Makes sense.
And I think they handled the situation as well as one could, but it was one of those things that, like, I was there because I know the artist, a friend of mine, and I was just sitting there and I'm like, I'm not saying anything because this is awkward as shit.
You definitely have to be. Do you want to say hello?
Oh,
okay.
Right when I finally swear.
Oh, he's fine. He doesn't understand. No, I mean, artists have complete control now, and that might be scary for some others.
Oh yeah.
Because you rely on these other people to manage that while you go create. Now you have to be the creator. Now you have to manage that content consistently and chop it up in a way that people can keep you memorable in their minds, and that's a lot of work. And not everyone has the stamina for, and there are a lot of artists who just don't want to do that work. And I'm like, then it's going to be much harder for you coming out in 2021 or beyond because you didn't set the framework for yourself in 2020. Yeah. Some folks, that's okay with them, and that's fine. That it's not a problem. I think the other thing to Don's question in terms of opportunity is for us, we've been asserting ourselves in other industries, like very intentionally, because, for instance, the tourism and hospitality industries, like we know that industry is suffering, but people are still visiting the city.
Yep.
So now it's how do we change the marketing strategy that highlights the inclusivity of all the types of disciplines, artistic disciplines and genres that have once been ignored for decades. So we're challenging that industry to rethink how it markets our city and state to the rest of the world, because they're perpetuating certain divides and silos and racist, perceptions about our city. Yeah. Because someone in that office only knows one aspect of Boston, which is probably old Boston, not new Boston. And that's how with COVID, it's allowed us to really look at the facts and the statistics and the marketing material and the advertisement material. It's had us look at finding other organizations or venues or community leaders or influencers that we've never met before, and saying, here's who we are, how can we help? How can we help this current generation, the next generation of creative entrepreneurs to be successful, because we benefit from what they create.
So, two things. One, I wanted to point out a comment from our good friend Dan Whitener from Gangsta Grass, who's in the room watching.
I love y'all.
Letting us know that he can't imagine he can't imagine the Zoom going better than in person because at least there's a mute button. As it turns out, there is. But when a belligerent person realizes they're muted, it's sort of. It gets awkward. It's all I'm saying.
It does. But you'd also kick them out the room too. Like, I think that there's some power dynamics with these online tools that if you don't know how to use them properly, it can totally mess up your whole career.
No,
but
absolutely.
It's the same way you have to train an audience to think about how they're going to experience music in person.
Yeah.
Let alone do that in a virtual setting. But you have tools that can monitor the behavior versus you can't necessarily do that in a venue.
Yeah.
Except when someone's being a butthole, then yes, you can throw them out.
Yeah.
But now you literally have the control to kick them out.
Yeah.
Okay. And they never have to come back.
Yeah. No, I mean that is an interesting side of it, certainly. We're about at 2 hours, which is normally when we start slowing down. So I wanted to give you specifically an opportunity. I will toss up the ever important. This is how to give BAMs money, and if you got money, they're a great place to give it. And I believe that wholeheartedly. But I would love, Catherine, if there's any specific thing that you want to kind of leave people with or let them know what's going on in the near future with the fest.
Yeah, sure. So the organization, we're showing up differently for artists. We're changing our language. One is that we've learned that the term artist has gotten such a derogatory shadow over the last couple of years, given the history of the term and how when it got to the Americas, it was a catch-all for everyone and it lost its value. Yeah. So we're changing from saying the word artist to now saying creative entrepreneur, because all of us are freelancers. We make money off of our creative capital, and we need to be valued and taken seriously as thought leaders and contributors to this country, if not society. So as an organization, we're changing our language. 2, for our festival, we are scaling to a 3-day event, which is unheard of in times of post a pandemic. But what's important about us expanding is really focusing on the education part of that, is that there's a lot of creative people who need assistance and connection to those who have made it, those who are growing their business, those who don't have to choose between raising their family and being a creative entrepreneur. You can do both. And that there are people in all these industries that can help you to do that. You just got to show up. So there's a conference style portion now to the festival that I'm excited to offer for 2021 and beyond, so that there's artists and entrepreneurs and thought leaders and industry experts from around the country talking about key things that I think that creative people always go through. One is about their health, their personal well-being, what it means to protect their intellectual capital, their intellectual property, what it means to activate their artivism, being an active artist and an activist in their community and for their industry or genre or their discipline. What does it mean to advocate? I know it's a dirty word sometimes, but it's not as bad as you think it is, as I've learned. Mm-hmm. And how do you do that, right? Knowing that there is state funding out here that we all have access to, but only a few people know that. So learning that from people about how to advocate for the things that you deserve and need in order to function as a creative person to the economy you're a part of and the communities you're a part of. We'll definitely continue to do virtual programming. We know that when the state allows, we'll always do in-person things. It might be more smaller and more intimate, which I think is always the best kind of environment. But we do hope to get back to the idea of being 100% outdoors, but obviously we have to figure out how that's going to work. And, we're always looking for people to join our board. We're trying to develop a artist council. We're trying to develop different committees to help us advance our work. it's not enough for us to just break down racial and social barriers. You know, we literally are pulling the levers of racial justice, social justice, racial equity, and economic empowerment for creative entrepreneurs. And that's not just them doing that work. It's also us as consumers supporting them in what they do. Because as I firmly believe in our team, creative entrepreneurs reflect their lived experiences, which also means the way we treat them. And so whatever they put on record or whatever they write down, that is forever in history that future generations go back to understand where we made our mistakes or where we were successful.
Yep.
So we all play a part in supporting each other in this, regardless.
Agreed.
So,
well, that's perfect. That's a wonderful way to sort of sum up the nature of what you guys are working on and what you're doing. I don't think I will ever be anything other than completely enamored at everything that you do, because it is so wonderful, and it speaks to my heart. I'm happy to consider you a friend, and thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Absolutely.
You know, I won't share with the people that are watching now or will watch this down the line, but the reason I sent you that video, there were alternative reasons why I sent you that video, and I think I explained in the video or in the text why I did. So we'll talk more about that in the not the too distant future. But we're Jake and I will close down the show real quick, and we'll talk real soon. Sent a message to you in the private chat. We'll catch up. All right. He's got people up as they say goodbye. It's a magic power of mine that is not magic or powerful. That was a fantastic conversation. And you know, the funny thing is, I realize us choosing to run a long format, 2-hour long conversation, for a lot of people, there's this sense of like, oh, that's a lot of time. What we found is we've approached, there are times that we approach and we're like, you know what, we'll try an hour. We'll see if we can make it an hour. And every single time the conversation just warrants, like, we look down, we're like, oh, we're an hour and 45 minutes. Oh, that's lost. Yeah. So I just, Catherine's one of those people that I could talk to for days. She's just so driven to do good, and driven to do good in a really tangible, like, she can talk the talk, but man, does she walk the walk. Like the talk is like, if you make her stop, sit down, she'll talk the talk, but you can almost see the annoyance in her eyes. She's like, I could be walking right now. So I adore her, and really great to have her here.
That was great.
Next week we've got Ruby Bayer, who is I believe I'm probably gonna get her title wrong, but I believe she's the community manager for ArenaNet, which is the game company behind a game called Guild Wars 2, which at its peak had well over, I believe, 300,000 concurrent users at the same time. And she is the person that has managed that community of people, which is generally regarded in the realm of video games, where the community of people that play video games don't really have a fantastic reputation for being friendly and or helpful. This game does. And we're going to talk about sort of how that went about. It's a game company that was very clear about their intentions in representation and a bunch of stuff there. So that'll be a fun conversation. So I hope you guys tune in next week for that one. Jake, anything you want to leave us with?
No, I'm looking forward to the rest of the season. We've got a great conversation this evening, as ever. I'm really grateful for all the people that have joined us. Great to see Don Sheldon and Dan Whitener joining us.
Don, we feel the same way. The good news is it'll be up on YouTube soon. The entire second season is not up on YouTube, but will be very, very soon.
So great to see those. No, just great to see those people out there, and we've got a lot of great guests coming up. So always looking forward to these conversations.
Awesome. Well, he's Jake Bush on accordion.
He's Ethan Baird. damn it, you switched sides on me.
I did.
Just to fuck with me. He's even paired on the saw. No, the banjo. No, god damn it. The guitar. I'm just gonna go through the instruments that you've picked up over the years. Yeah. Ethan Baird.
Literally picked up. That is my entire attachment to those.
I'm going to learn how to play this and then put it down and never learn.
Why would I learn banjo? I'm friends with Dan Whitener. There's no reason to learn banjo. We're going to end with, we'll go out on sort of a trailer that we're putting together. It's not in its complete finished form. We gave a really rough version of it last week. This week's a little bit more refined, and next week it'll be awesome. Thanks to everyone for being here. Thanks to Dan Whitener for the feedback on the video. I'm working on it. We'll make it better. And thanks to Catherine Morris for just being so Catherine Morris. Yeah. She's just that freaking cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.